Chapter 6. Years of Silence. Time didn't stop for anyone. Not even for love. Lucian left 3 months after graduation, boarding a plane bound for London to study international business at King's College. Emma stood at the terminal gates, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest, blinking through the sharp fluorescent glare as she watched his tall figure vanish beyond security. He turned back once, just once, and the look in his eyes held an entire universe of unspoken promises. He mouthed 2 words, "Write me." She nodded. But she never did. At first they texted. Short, staccato messages that were streaks of familiarity across the vast ocean between them. Lucian, first day. Nearly fell asleep during the dean's speech. Send reinforcements. Emma, should have brought flashcards and coffee. You'd survive. Lucian, survive? I plan to dominate. But as weeks stretched into months, their conversations became less frequent. The time zones made everything harder. So did Emma's growing responsibilities. Her mother relapsed in the fall. Pneumonia turned into something deeper, a slow, quiet erosion of her health. Hospital stays. Specialist visits. Emma put off her own college plans for a year and poured herself into part-time jobs. Tutoring, translating, shelving books, filling out endless, soul-crushing paperwork for insurance. Lucian offered to fly back. She told him not to. Not because she didn't want him. The desire was a constant, aching pulse beneath her skin, but because seeing him again might break her fragile resolve. She couldn't afford to feel anything that fragile again. One afternoon, she opened her inbox to find a single, unread email from him. Subject, they have terrible coffee here. Body, but I found a book that reminded me of you. A first edition of Poetry of the Stars. It's in French, so obviously I understood nothing. Miss you. Always L. She didn't reply. Instead, she pressed her fingers to the screen, a ghost of a touch across the glowing words, and whispered, I miss you too. By the time Emma finally enrolled in university, it was at a local state college. Not her dream school. But it was close enough to the hospital. Affordable. Practical. She studied applied linguistics with a concentration in simultaneous interpreting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She became a ghost in her own life, gliding between campus libraries, hospital bedsides, and freelance assignments. Her voice grew stronger in the booth. Her confidence sharpened with every presentation she translated for foreign CEOs. But her heart? That part stayed quiet, carefully guarded. Every time Lucian's name lit her phone, she stared at it for too long, her breath catching with a familiar ache. And every time she answered, she felt herself unraveling, the carefully constructed walls of her life cracking under the gentle pressure of his attention. So eventually, she stopped answering. The last message he sent her before the silence was short. Lucian, I get it. But I'm still here when you're ready. She never deleted it. Emma's mother passed in the spring of her 2nd year. It was a slow, quiet ending. Peaceful, the doctor said. Emma didn't cry. She simply stood in the doorway of the hospital room, one hand pressed to the white painted frame, and thought, now I am entirely my own. She organized the funeral alone. Chose lilies. Sold the apartment. Moved into a tiny 1-bedroom across the river. Threw herself into work so completely, it became her salvation, the only thing that felt real. Her first interpreting contract was at an international biotech summit. She wore heels that blistered her feet and a blazer that didn't quite fit. But when she slipped into the glass booth, adjusted her headset, and began to translate, the world quieted. She belonged there. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was pretending. A year later, she won the lottery. It was a joke, really, a $10 scratch card she'd bought from the corner store after a particularly brutal week of back-to-back translation sessions. $1.2 million. Just like that. She stared at the numbers, checked the back 3 times, and showed the cashier with trembling hands. They confirmed it. She didn't scream. Didn't jump. She just stood there in stunned silence, wondering if the universe had finally mistaken her for someone else. She paid off every debt. Set up a trust for future medical emergencies. Donated to the library where she used to shelve books. And then, finally, she bought herself a second-hand car, a navy blue Volvo, and took a week off to drive to the ocean. She sat on the sand, her toes buried in the grainy warmth, and let the salt wind strip her clean. No texts. No emails. No Lucian. Just her. And the quiet ache that never quite left. The Paris reunion. April 3rd, 4 years later, Paris International Luxury Expo. Emma stepped into the grand, glass-paneled hall, headset secured, tablet in hand. She was 25 now. Professional. Polished. Her hair was sleek, her posture impeccable, and her voice steady as she interpreted between French and English for one of the world's top luxury firms. The jewelry auction would begin in an hour. She had already memorized the catalog and reviewed every company name. She was ready. Until she heard his name. Lucian Carter, CEO of Alton Holdings, is scheduled to speak at the executive roundtable this evening. Her chest seized, a sudden sharp intake of air. The world tilted on its axis, all the careful progress of the last 4 years suddenly gone. She hadn't heard his voice in 4 years. Hadn't seen his face in even longer. Emma slipped out of the corridor and into the nearest service hall, her hand pressed to the cold wall for support. He was here. In Paris. And she wasn't ready. Emma stood frozen in the magnificent marble corridor of the Paris Convention Center, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead muffled by the sudden, frantic rush of blood in her ears. Lucian Carter. The name echoed like a heartbeat. She wasn't ready. Not for the voice that still lived in the back of her mind. Not for the person who'd once looked at her like she was the only thing that made sense in a world of chaos. 4 years of silence didn't disappear with a single headline. But some names, some people, never stopped vibrating in your bones. She slipped back into the interpreting booth just before the jewelry showcase began. Her colleague glanced at her in concern, but Emma forced a nod, placed her headset on and steadied her breath. Business first. Heart later. She delivered each translation with flawless cadence. Not once did her voice crack, even when her hands trembled slightly behind the console. The clients in front of her never noticed. That was her job, to be invisible and essential all at once. She was a voice. Nothing more. Until the final panel. She didn't see him at first. Just the back of a tailored charcoal gray suit, the confident gait, the low buzz of introductions as the roundtable began. Then he turned toward the microphone. Emma's heart stopped. Lucian Carter hadn't changed in all the ways that mattered. Still broad-shouldered. Still calm, still sharp-eyed. But older, more sculpted now. His voice, when he spoke, was deeper. Polished even. A man who had clearly grown into his title, his wealth, his world. But his smile? That crooked, secret half-smile she remembered from high school? That was still his. She translated automatically, word for word. Numbers. Business strategies. Market expansion plans. But every syllable was shaped around his voice. She tried not to look at him too directly. She failed. Because halfway through the panel, Lucian's eyes swept the room and stopped. Right on her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, one corner of his mouth lifted in a ghost of a smile, a tiny, fragile acknowledgement that sent a shockwave through her. Emma felt her entire body flush with heat. And for the first time in years, she forgot her lines. After the panel ended, she disappeared. She packed her headset with shaking hands, avoided every reflective surface, and fled into the hallway. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing. She rounded a corner and collided with him. Art. The files in her arms spilled to the floor, scattering like a deck of cards. Emma gasped, stumbling back. Strong hands steadied her, his touch a familiar, grounding presence after so long. She began, then looked up and froze. Lucian's voice was low, disbelieving. Emma? The sound of her name in his voice, it undid her. She bent to gather her files, hoping to escape into some professional apology. But Lucian crouched with her, his fingers brushing hers as they reached for the same paper. The brief contact, a jolt of electricity. Their eyes met. Up close, his face was sharper than she remembered. But his eyes? Still the same stormy gray-blue. Still too kind. I thought, he began. I didn't know you were here. I work here, she said too quickly, the words a frantic shield. For the firm. I was interpreting today. Lucian stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. You're a translator now. Simultaneous interpreter, she corrected, falling back into the comfort of a habit. Mostly French-English corporate settings. He nodded, almost to himself, a slow, gentle smile on his lips. Of course. You were always brilliant. The words hit her like a slap and a kiss all at once. I should go, she said, stepping back, a familiar urge to run clawing at her. Wait, he said, his voice quiet, a gentle plea. Please. Emma stopped. Lucian's tone shifted. Softer. 4 years, Emma. And you still run. She looked at him, then really looked. And all the old wounds rushed up, a sudden, overwhelming torrent of memory. The email she never answered. The messages left on read. The necklace in her drawer. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice a whisper. Lucian's jaw flexed, a small movement of controlled emotion. You didn't hurt me. Then why do you look like that? He didn't answer and she didn't push. They stood in silence as the world moved around them, executives in heels and suits rushing past with briefcases and tight agendas. But in the eye of the storm, it was just them. Emma broke the quiet. You look, well. Lucian gave a small, sad smile. So do you. She raised a brow, a hint of her old self returning. You're a terrible liar. Still beautiful, he added, so quietly she almost missed it. Her heart twisted. Don't, she whispered, her voice fragile. He took a careful step forward, closing the space between them. You think I stopped? Emma stiffened, her body a battlefield of old defenses and new desires. Lucian continued, his voice a soft, beautiful confession. Do you think I stopped loving you just because you disappeared? You had every reason to. He shook his head, a decisive, gentle motion. But no reason ever felt big enough. Emma looked away, the weight of his words a pressure on her chest. You're the CEO of Alton Holdings now. You live in another world. I've lived in another world since the moment I met you, he said, his voice full of a profound sincerity. But you were always the only thing that made sense. Her hands clenched at her sides, a desperate effort to hold herself together. This isn't the place, she whispered. Then meet me tonight. Her eyes flew to his. Please, he said, the word a gentle caress. Let me say everything I haven't said. Emma didn't agree. She didn't decline either. She just stood there, her heart in her throat, and said, text me the time. And then she walked away, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, knowing full well that the moment she turned back, she'd never be able to forget the look in his eyes. Because that look said everything she'd been running from. So, always, her. Chapter 7, What Remains? The cafe was tucked along a quiet, cobblestone street near the Seine, its windows glowing with a soft, warm light in the dusk. Outside, the city carried on. Motorbikes hummed past, lovers laughed in French, and the world seemed to hold its breath on ancient bridges. But inside, for two people, time slowed to a near halt. Emma arrived first. She chose a table near the back, away from the windows, a small fortress of solitude. Her posture was stiff, her every movement too precise, as if she were a character in a play, afraid to misstep. She'd spent an hour deciding what to wear and still felt utterly unprepared. She kept checking her phone, not because she doubted he'd come, but because she didn't trust herself not to leave. The door opened with a soft jingle. Lucian stepped in. He spotted her instantly. No hesitation. No scan of the room. He looked like he'd known exactly where she would be. He walked toward her, that same measured grace she remembered from school, calm, slightly amused, but with a focused intensity that made it feel as if everything else in the room faded in her presence. Emma stood automatically, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. They didn't hug. Instead, they just looked at each other for a long, silent time, for years of unspoken words passing between them in the quiet air. Lucian broke the silence first, his voice a low, gentle rumble. I thought about this moment more times than I can count. Emma's voice was steady but a little breathless. So did I. They ordered coffee, black for him, espresso with a single sugar cube for her. The silence stretched between them as the waitress stepped away. Neither of them touched their cups. Finally, Lucian said, You vanished. Emma didn't flinch. I know. I texted, emailed, called. 4 months. I read them all, she admitted, the confession a quiet, painful thing. Lucian stared at her, his eyes searching. Then why? Because I didn't know how to love you when I was still trying to survive myself. It wasn't an excuse. Just the truth. A raw, fragile piece of her soul. Emma looked down at her cup, tracing a careful line on the ceramic. My mom was dying. I was broke. Drowning in responsibility. And you were thousands of miles away, becoming someone extraordinary. I didn't want to drag you into my mess. Lucian's voice was soft, so soft. You wouldn't have. I would have, she insisted, a fierce pain in her eyes. I was a mess. I had nothing to offer you. Not even the decency to say goodbye properly. Lucian's hand curled slightly around his cup, a silent clenching of his frustration and his love. I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you. Emma's throat tightened. That's the thing. I didn't know how to let myself be needed. I still don't. A long pause hung between them, heavy with years of silence. Then Lucian asked the question he'd buried for years. Did you ever stop loving me? Emma looked up, her gaze steady, a world of honesty in her eyes. And everything she'd kept hidden, Every journal page, every silent wish, every ache, rose to the surface, a flood of emotion she couldn't contain. "No," she whispered. His breath hitched, a silent, painful sound. "But I didn't believe that love was enough," she continued, her voice full of a hard-won wisdom. "Not when I was still trying to believe in myself." Lucian leaned back, a hand coming up to gently rub the back of his neck, as if he needed space to breathe in the overwhelming honesty of her words. They sat in the quiet, their coffees untouched between them. Outside, the sky had turned a pale, ethereal blue, the last light of Parisian twilight brushing the cobblestones. "I used to write you letters," Lucian said suddenly, his voice a quiet confession. Emma blinked, surprised. "You did?" "Hundreds," he said. "Never sent them. Just wrote them down. Everything I couldn't say through a screen." She smiled faintly, a genuine, fragile thing. "I used to write about you too. In a journal." He raised a brow, the familiar glint of a smile in his eyes. "Do I come off charming or insufferable?" "Both," she said, her voice soft with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "But mostly unforgettable." Their eyes met. And there it was again, that impossible gravity, that pull that had never faded, that had only deepened with time. Lucian's voice dropped, a serious, gentle murmur. "You don't owe me anything. I didn't ask you here to guilt you. I just needed you to know. I never stopped waiting." Emma exhaled shakily, a quiet, shuddering release. "Even after all this time?" "Especially after all this time." She looked down at her hands, still and graceful on the tabletop. "I'm not the same girl you loved in high school." "I know," Lucian said, his voice full of a quiet pride. "You're stronger, braver, more impossible to forget." Emma's voice cracked, a small break in her composure. "And you're not the boy who teased me in detention." He smiled, a heartbreakingly familiar curve of his lips. "I'm not. I still think about that day, you know, when you filled your notebook with stars instead of lines." Emma flushed, the memory a sweet, painful ghost. Lucian's gaze softened, a deep, tender well of emotion. "You were always reaching for something higher. I just hoped one day, you'd let me stand beside you when you got there." The cafe grew quieter. A couple left, and the waitress dimmed the lights near the entrance. The city outside shimmered under the golden lamplight, Paris breathing around them, its magic a silent witness. Lucian reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers with a tentative, electric touch. Emma didn't pull away. He said, "What now?" She stared at his hand, then at him. The face she once memorized. The voice that haunted her silence. The boy who became a man while she was learning how to live. And now he was here. Still. Always. Here. "I don't know," she whispered, the words of fragile, beautiful hope. "But I want to find out." They left the cafe just as the city was settling into its velvet night. Paris shimmered under the warm gold street lamps, its cobblestone streets glossed with recent rain. Emma tucked her hands into her coat pockets, walking beside Lucian in a comfortable silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind filled with too much meaning to put into words just yet. "So," Lucian said after a few quiet blocks, his voice a soft, playful whisper, "if this were one of your favorite old movies, what would happen now?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "Depends. Are we in a tragic French film or a cheesy American rom-com?" Lucian smirked. "Rom-com, obviously." Emma smiled, her eyes forward, a private joy blooming in her chest. "Then I guess we'd wander the city, argue about something ridiculous, accidentally fall into the Seine, and end up kissing on a rooftop." He glanced over at her, his eyes full of a soft, gentle laughter. "I can arrange 2 of those." She laughed, a real, genuine sound that surprised them both. It was the first time she had laughed like that in days, and it felt like sunshine. They wandered without direction, allowing the city to guide them. Down narrow lanes tucked between art galleries and small, cozy creperies. Past couples sharing cigarettes on balconies, buskers singing Edith Piaf under flickering lamps. The kind of walk you don't plan, where conversation doesn't fill the space so much as grow from it. Lucian slid his hands into his pockets, his body angled toward hers. "Do you remember that library cart you used to push?" Emma grinned. "The one with the squeaky wheel? You used to mutter to yourself while shelving. I thought you were plotting something." "I was," she deadpanned, her eyes twinkling. "World domination through Dewey Decimal." Lucian's laugh was a deep, warm sound that wrapped around her like a blanket. "God, I missed you." The words dropped between them like stones. Not heavy but real. A confession of a pain she hadn't known he carried. Emma hesitated, then said, "I missed you too." He looked over, his expression softening with a quiet relief. You don't have to pretend anymore, you know? I'm not pretending, she said, her voice full of a new honesty. I'm just cautious. Lucian nodded. I get it. Another beat of silence. Then Emma asked quietly a fragile question. Did you ever come back? Lucian's expression shifted, a flicker of old pain in his eyes. Once. She blinked. What? 2 years ago. For a week. I didn't tell anyone. Just walked by your old apartment. Sat outside the hospital once. I didn't see you. Why didn't you call? Lucian looked at her then, his eyes raw with a long-held fear. Because I didn't think I could survive hearing you say you'd moved on. Emma swallowed hard, her own throat tight with emotion. I never did, she said, the words a fragile promise. They stopped at a bridge, the kind that arched gracefully over the Seine with wrought iron railings and locks fastened by lovers from every corner of the world. Lucian leaned on the railing, glancing down at the dark river. Do you ever think about what it would have been like if things had been different? All the time, Emma said, her gaze fixed on the water. He nodded. And yet here we are. She stepped closer, a small space between them. You know, I used to imagine running into you again. Lucian smiled faintly, a tender curve of his lips. Was it this romantic? No, she admitted. Usually I was more composed. Less emotionally compromised. He laughed gently. You're doing fine. They stood in the soft quiet, the city breathing around them. Then Emma asked, her voice a quiet, courageous thing, did you ever fall in love with anyone else? Lucian didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the lights shimmering on the water. I dated, he said finally. Some of it serious, most of it not. But no one ever made me feel the way you did. Emma exhaled, her heart rising and sinking in the same breath. She asked, and now? Lucian turned to her fully, his hands moving from his pockets to rest on the railing beside hers, a protective barrier. Now I feel like I've been holding my breath for 4 years. And I'm scared that if I let it out, you'll vanish again. Her voice shook, a fragile thing in the velvet night. I don't want to vanish. Then stay, he whispered, his voice a simple, beautiful plea. Just stay. They didn't kiss. But they didn't need to. Because the way Emma reached for his hand, tangling her fingers with his like she'd done it 1,000 times before, said more than any kiss ever could. They walked like that through the quiet Paris streets, two people finally learning how to walk toward each other without running from the past. It wasn't until they reached her hotel lobby that the crack formed. Lucian paused before the elevator, hesitating, a sudden tension in his shoulders. Before I go, he said slowly, there's something I should tell you. Emma blinked, sensing the shift, the sudden change in the atmosphere. Lucian's jaw tightened. My father, he's been trying to acquire a stake in Maison Durand, the auction house you've been working with. She froze, the words a cold shock. What? He didn't know you worked there at first. But once he found out. Wait, Emma said, her voice rising. You knew? You've known about this all this time? I only found out a few days ago, Lucian said quickly, his voice urgent with a need for her to believe him. Right before the expo. I didn't tell him. But the deal's been in motion for a while. He wants to rebrand. Cut staff. Shift everything toward a digital luxury model. Emma took a sharp step back, the space between them suddenly a vast, freezing chasm. He wants to gut it. Lucian's expression darkened, a profound sadness in his eyes. I tried to talk him out of it. And you didn't think to mention this before? I didn't want to ruin tonight. Emma's stomach twisted with a new, bitter kind of pain. So while I was opening up to you, you were hiding something that could destroy the only place I feel like I belong? It's not like that, Lucian said, his voice pleading, reaching for her. I'm not my father. But you're part of his world, she said quietly, the words a cold, undeniable truth. Whether you like it or not. Lucian flinched, the words a physical blow. Emma? She stepped away, the distance between them growing with every beat of her heart. I can't do this tonight. He looked at her, helpless, the love and fear in his eyes a desperate thing. I just got you back, he said. Please don't walk away again. Her voice was hoarse, a ragged whisper. Then don't give me a reason to. And she turned, disappearing into the elevator, leaving Lucian standing in a city full of light, wondering if he'd just lost her all over again. Chapter 8. The Fault in the Foundation. Emma didn't sleep. She lay in bed with the Paris skyline stretched outside her window, shadows of stone buildings and the faint, glittering lights of the city dancing across the glass. Her heart beat a too loud rhythm in the silence, echoing Lucian's words on an endless loop. I didn't want to ruin tonight. But he had. Or maybe she had, by believing, just for a moment, that love alone could exist without consequence. By morning, Emma had already packed. Her contract with the expo was ending that afternoon anyway. The remaining panels didn't require interpretation. No one would notice if she left early. She took one last look at the Eiffel Tower in the distance, a small, fragile ache in her chest, whispered a soft au revoir and closed the curtain. Back in New York, spring had barely begun. The air was cold and gray, the city humming with its usual low-level chaos. Emma stepped off the airport shuttle and rolled her suitcase through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, trying desperately not to think about Lucian. It didn't work. She could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers, hear the way he'd said, "I missed you," as if it had taken years to unbury the words. But business was business. Family was family. And Emma knew better than anyone what it meant to be on the losing side of both. She threw herself back into work. Maison Durand's New York office had picked up buzz after the Paris Expo, and they offered Emma 2 new contracts almost immediately: press releases to translate, catalog descriptions to streamline, a new Portuguese partnership to onboard. She didn't ask questions. She just accepted, said a quiet merci, and worked until her fingers ached. But the worry crept in. The whispers about internal restructuring. The sudden meeting cancellations. The polite but ambiguous responses from upper management. Lucian hadn't lied. His father was preparing for acquisition. And Emma had no idea if Lucian was fighting it or smoothing the path. On the third day back, her phone buzzed. "Lucian, you left without saying goodbye." She didn't respond. 15 minutes later, another message came. "Lucian, I'm in New York. I want to see you." Emma stared at the screen, her heart hammering. She typed a message, deleted it, put the phone face down and pushed it away. He waited another day. Then he showed up. At Maison Durand. Emma had just finished a call with the Lisbon team when she turned around and saw him standing in the lobby, a striking, out-of-place figure. He was dressed in black slacks, no tie, his sleeves rolled to the elbows as if he'd just stepped out of a boardroom and back into her world. He looked tired, hopeful, wrecked. Emma took a steadying breath and crossed the polished floor between them. "Lucian." "Emma." She crossed her arms, a familiar shield. "You shouldn't be here. I came to apologize." "You already did that, in your own way." He hesitated, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not part of the acquisition. But you benefit from it. Not if it happens the way my father wants." Emma's eyes narrowed, a quiet storm building within them. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, "I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to offer you something different." They stepped outside into the gusty spring wind, the street loud with the rush of passing taxis and the shout of a street vendor selling roasted peanuts. Lucian turned to face her, his gaze holding hers. "I declined the board's proposal." Emma stared, the words a cold shock she couldn't process. "What?" "At the last shareholders' meeting," he said, his voice firm and low, "I refused to support the acquisition terms. I lost a lot of leverage. My father wasn't pleased." Emma blinked, a slow, dawning realization spreading through her. "You fought him?" "I told him Maison Durand wasn't just an investment. It's a legacy. One that doesn't belong to him to dismantle." She was silent, her chest rising and falling with a stunned incredulity. Lucian continued, his voice a soft, beautiful confession. "You think I live in a world where I can't understand yours. But I do. More than you know. Because I've been watching people like him take things from people like you my whole life. And I'm done pretending that doesn't matter." Emma's chest ached, a sharp, clean pain. "I didn't tell you right away," he said, "because I didn't want you to think I was trying to fix things for you. I wanted to protect something you love." Her voice was quiet, a fragile question. "And what if I don't want to be protected?" Lucian took a breath, the wind whipping his hair. "Then let me stand beside you instead." They stood in silence as a cab splashed through a puddle nearby. Somewhere down the block, a saxophone played a slow, jazzy tune, its melody a quiet counterpoint to the rush of the city. "I've spent years learning how to be alone," Emma said, her voice filled with a profound sadness. "How to build walls so high that nothing could get in. And I was good at it. I was." Lucian watched her carefully, his eyes full of a deep, patient understanding. "But then you showed up. Again. With your ridiculous smirks and your heartfelt confessions and your infuriating loyalty." Her voice cracked, a small, painful break in her composure. "And I don't know what to do with that." Lucian stepped closer, the space between them shrinking to an intimate, electric hum. Then let me help you figure it out. Emma looked up at him, her eyes full of stormlight and fragile hope. I'm scared. So am I. And if we try again, she whispered, it could fall apart. Lucian nodded, his gaze unwavering. Then let's build something that doesn't. She didn't say yes. Not in so many words. But when she reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his, and rested her forehead against his chest, it was enough. It wasn't a promise. But it was the beginning of one. It started with a box. Plain. One. Taped at the corners. Emma pulled it from the back of her closet a few nights after that windy street corner meeting, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite name. Inside, photographs, medical receipts, notes scribbled in pencil, and, tucked beneath an old crocheted scarf, a faded, leather-bound diary. Her mother's. Emma hadn't opened it since the funeral. She wasn't even sure why she kept it. But now, for the first time, she didn't turn away from the weight of it. She brought it with her to the cafe near the park, the one Lucian had started calling ours, even though they'd only met there twice. It was quiet on Tuesday afternoons. Just the right amount of background noise to soften the edges of whatever she was about to do. Lucian was already there when she arrived, nursing a cappuccino and scrolling through his phone with that slight frown of concentration she remembered from calculus class. When he looked up, his eyes softened, the smile that came to his lips a genuine, beautiful thing. You came, he said, as if he still couldn't quite believe it every time she did. Emma sat down slowly, placing the box on the table between them. Lucian raised an eyebrow. That looks serious. It is, she said. But not in a bad way. He waited. She opened the lid, pulled out the journal, and slid it toward him. Lucian's hand hovered over the worn cover, a silent question in his eyes. Is this? My mom's? Emma said, her voice a quiet, fragile confession. I haven't read all of it. I couldn't back then. But I want you to see it. Why? Emma met his gaze, her own full of a new, vulnerable trust. Because if you're going to be in my life again, I need you to understand the part of it I've spent the most time trying to survive. Lucian said nothing. He just reached for the journal, his touch gentle as if he were holding something sacred. They read it together, page by page. Each entry was short, written in her mother's neat, looping hand. Some were ordinary, notes about groceries or the weather. Others were quiet, heartbreaking revelations. March 11th. Emma's tutoring again tonight. She says it's just to keep busy, but I know she's doing it for me. I don't deserve her. But I'm so proud I could cry. May 2nd. Emma smiled today when I mentioned her prom. I don't know if she'll go. I hope someone sees her the way I do. June 15th. I heard her crying in the kitchen last night. She doesn't know I was awake. I wish I could take the weight off her shoulders for just one day. Lucian's hands tightened around the edges of the paper, his knuckles turning white. Emma sat quietly beside him, not watching his face, just staring down at the words that had once broken her and now, somehow, began to stitch something back together. I used to think, she said softly, that I had to carry everything alone. That being loved meant being a burden. Lucian looked up, his eyes full of a profound sadness and love. You were never a burden. I know that now, she said. But knowing it and believing it are different things. He reached over and, with a tender touch, brushed his thumb against her wrist. And now? Emma inhaled slowly, the air feeling lighter than it had in years. Now I want to try. Not to erase the past, but to grow beyond it. Lucian's smile was a beautiful, tender, aching thing. I've been waiting to grow with you for years. After they finished the journal, they walked through the park. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft brushstrokes of amber and violet. Emma felt lighter, not weightless, not healed, but lighter. As if the act of sharing her pain had created a small space where something new could grow. Lucian, beside her, didn't try to hold her hand. He let her be the one to close the distance. And she did. Her fingers brushing his. Then curling around them. Then resting comfortably in his palm like they'd never belonged anywhere else. I want to ask you something, Lucian said as they crossed the arched wooden bridge over the duck pond. Emma looked over, a smile on her lips. Okay. If you could do anything right now, anything without worrying about money or expectations, what would it be? Emma hesitated. Travel. Not for work. Just see things. Feel small under the stars in another country. Learn languages just because I love them. Write something no one else needs to read. Lucian smiled, a deep, tender warmth in his eyes. You should. It feels selfish. It feels honest. She raised an eyebrow, a hint of her old self returning. And you? Lucian looked out at the water, his gaze distant but full of a quiet resolve. I'd build something of my own. Not just inherit my father's empire. A company with purpose. Something sustainable. With people I trust. Maybe something global. With a partner who calls me out when I get too arrogant. Emma smirked. That might be a full-time job. I can pay well, he said, eyes twinkling. In kisses and croissants. She bumped his shoulder gently, the small gesture a world of intimacy. But neither of them laughed. Because in that moment the possibilities were real. Later, as they walked back toward the city lights, Emma said something she hadn't dared to before. I'm scared every day. Lucian's voice was low, a soft comfort. So am I. But I think, she continued, her voice gaining strength, I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. Lucian stopped walking. Turned to face her. And for the first time since high school he kissed her. Not the soft brush of lips in a dream. Not the hesitant maybe of what if. But a kiss of memory and promise and presence. Of something whole and hard-earned. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the cool evening air. You're everything I waited for, he whispered. And everything I'll keep choosing. Every single day. Emma nodded, her eyes full of silent, happy tears. Then let's begin again. Chapter 9, Paper Houses. They didn't move in together right away. Emma insisted on keeping her apartment, the tiny one-bedroom with its too thin walls and creaky floors. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Lucian didn't argue. Instead, he visited with takeout in one hand and flowers in the other, kissed her at the door like they had all the time in the world, and never asked her to rush. I like your place, he said one evening, stretching his long legs across her worn-out sofa. It smells like books and lavender tea. Emma snorted softly. It smells like thrift store furniture and microwaved curry. He grinned, the crinkle at the corner of his eyes a familiar, beautiful sight. Same thing. They started small, building their world brick by fragile brick. Lazy Sunday breakfasts with too much cinnamon and not enough coffee. Walks through used bookstores where Emma lingered at the translation shelves and Lucian pretended to understand the poetry. Movie nights that turned into messy, whispered debates over plot holes and endings. It was ordinary. And it was perfect. One morning, Emma woke to find him reading her heavily annotated copy of Pride and Prejudice, wearing her robe and eating dry cereal straight from the box. You're ridiculous, she murmured, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, a smile already forming on her lips. Lucian looked up, a playful glint in his eyes. You underlined every time Mr. Darcy brooded. I feel personally attacked. Emma smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. You should. He stood, crossed the room in 2 long strides and kissed her, a soft, deliberate kiss that told her she was the only line that mattered. But peace, they soon learned, came with a shelf life. Emma's career soared. After the Paris Expo, her client list doubled. She was flown to Milan, then Geneva. She interpreted for CEOs, scientists, and once, absurdly, a celebrity perfume launch. Her confidence grew with every assignment, but so did the pressure. She barely had time to breathe, or sleep, or eat meals that didn't come from vending machines. Lucian worried. You don't have to prove anything anymore, he said one night as she was curled over her laptop, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. Emma didn't look up. Yes, I do. To who? She didn't answer. Because she wasn't sure. Meanwhile, Lucian faced his own storm. The fallout from his refusal to support the Maison Durand acquisition had been swift and brutal. His father froze him out of several board initiatives. Whispers of too sentimental and weak circulated behind closed doors, a familiar cruelty dressed in suits and business jargon. The pressure to realign with the cold, unfeeling Carter family vision mounted daily. You knew what would happen, Emma said quietly one evening when he told her about the internal meetings he'd been excluded from. I did, Lucian said, his jaw tight. And I don't regret it. But the tension weighed on him. She saw it in the way he clenched his jaw when checking emails, in the hollow silence that followed late-night phone calls. He wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to being seen as the disappointment. And for the first time in their relationship, Emma didn't know how to help. One Thursday evening, they met in her apartment after a week apart. Emma had just flown back from Zurich, Lucian from a board retreat in Chicago. The air between them was too still, too heavy. Something had shifted, a quiet fault line opening beneath their feet. I got offered a permanent role with the European delegation, Emma said, standing by the window, her voice barely a whisper. It would mean 3 months abroad. Minimum. Lucian looked up from the floor where he was unlacing his shoes, his movements slowing to a halt. When? In a month. He didn't speak. He just sat there, a stillness in his posture that spoke volumes. Emma turned toward him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Say something. I don't want to be the reason you say no. I didn't say I would. But you're waiting for permission. Emma's voice was tight, thin with a long-held fear. No. I'm waiting to know if we're strong enough to survive another stretch of silence. Lucian stood, crossing the room slowly, his presence a quiet, unwavering anchor. We've survived worse. Barely, she whispered. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and sure. Then let's do more than survive this time. Emma looked into his eyes, the same storm gray she'd once memorized from across a high school desk, and saw the man he'd become. Still stubborn, still wild, but steady now too. A man who was choosing her, choosing them even when it hurt. She didn't cry, but she didn't speak either. She just wrapped her arms around him and held on, a silent promise in the gentle pressure of her embrace. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, Emma whispered, "Do you ever think we're building something that could fall again?" Lucian traced his thumb across her knuckles, the soft, rhythmic motion a comfort. Everything falls eventually. Comforting, she murmured. He smiled softly, a genuine, tender thing. But maybe that's not the point. Then what is? To build it anyway. Together. The morning Emma left for Brussels was quiet. No dramatic send-off. No long, tearful goodbye at the airport. Just the hush of early light and the smell of Lucian's coffee as he waited by the window while she double-checked her passport for the third time. Her suitcase stood by the door, a silent testament to the distance she was about to travel. Emma ran a finger along the zipper, exhaling softly. Lucian watched her in silence, his eyes unreadable. He didn't want to make it harder than it already was. She finally turned to him. 3 months, she said, the words a fragile, beautiful thing. He nodded. 89 days, technically. But who's counting? She smiled, a small, fragile curve of her lips. It didn't quite reach her eyes. In the car they said little. Emma held his hand the whole ride, tracing her thumb in slow, hypnotic circles against his skin. It felt like something a child would do. Desperate. Anchoring. He didn't let go. At the curb, she lingered, her heart a heavy, aching weight. Call me when you land, he said. I will. Don't disappear. Her breath hitched. I'm not that girl anymore. Lucian's voice was quiet, full of a profound sincerity. I know. She stepped closer and kissed him once, slow and deep and full of all the words they didn't have time to say. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his, a final, intimate moment. I'm scared, she whispered. Lucian squeezed her hands, his touch a silent promise. So am I. But I believe in us. Emma stepped away before she could cry. And just like that, she was gone. The first week, they texted constantly, a steady stream of small, mundane things that built a bridge between continents. Emma, I don't understand Flemish elevators. I've already gotten stuck once. I think I insulted the concierge. Lucian, I'll be there in 8 hours with a toolbox and a baguette. Emma, please don't. The baguette would probably fix it though. Late at night, they called, his voice grounding her after long days translating economic reports, hers softening the tension that lived permanently in his shoulders. But even so, there were moments in between. Moments when their worlds pulled them in opposite directions. Emma thrived professionally. The European delegation loved her. Within 2 weeks, she was interpreting for high-level energy negotiations. Her precision, her calm, her uncanny ability to translate not just language but intention made her invaluable. But at night, in her rented studio with its perfect white walls and impersonal view, she felt the loneliness seep in. It was subtle. Like a draft she couldn't close the window against. Lucian was doing his best. He sent her handwritten letters, real ones, mailed through international courier services. Inside were quotes from their favorite books, silly doodles, and once pressed flower petals from the park where they first talked about the stars. She taped them to her closet door, a tiny gallery of their love. But still, some nights she rolled over, reached for the empty space beside her, and remembered he wasn't there. Back in New York, Lucian launched something new. A social impact investment firm, smaller than Carter Company but smarter. Focused. Ethical. He poured himself into it. Emma's voice rang in his head every time he pitched. Don't just build what they expect. Build what matters. It helped. But nothing filled the space she'd left behind. He called her before board meetings. She sent him voice notes from cafes in Leuven and train platforms in The Hague. They laughed. They flirted. They whispered, I miss yous, like prayers across a wire. But slowly, inevitably, the space between those moments began to stretch. The cracks showed one cold evening in mid-May. Emma missed his call. He didn't text back. 3 days passed. She finally messaged, the words a silent plea. Emma, I'm sorry I've been distant. Work has been non-stop. Lucian, it's okay. Just let me know you're still out there. Emma, always. But when he sent her a photo from the charity gala she used to interpret for him in a tux, the Carter name in lights, Ava Moore smiling in the corner of the frame, Emma stared at it too long. Her stomach twisted with a familiar, bitter pain. She wanted to trust him. She did trust him. But old scars whispered lies when silence grew too loud. That night she wrote a letter. Lucian, I'm here. Even when I'm not. Sometimes I think about the Emma you knew in high school and wonder if you'd still love her now. Not because I've changed too much, but because maybe I haven't changed enough. I still overthink. Still panic when things feel too good. Still flinch at words like forever. But when I think about you, I think about breath. About how I've held mine for years and didn't realize I was waiting to exhale until you touched my hand. 3 months. You said it like it was nothing. But it feels like everything. Still, I believe in us too. So here's me choosing you. Again. Even from a continent away. Yours, Emma. She didn't send it. Not yet. But the next morning she called him. And when he answered with a soft, Emma? Like he wasn't sure if it was a dream, she knew she would. Chapter 10. Homecoming. The day Emma returned to New York, it rained. Not the kind of romantic drizzle that softened the city skyline, but a full, slanted downpour. Umbrellas flipping, gutters overflowing, headlights glaring through a thick, gray mist. She stood just outside the terminal, her suitcase a heavy weight by her side, and was drenched in seconds. Typical, she thought, a small wry smile on her lips. Lucian wasn't there. She hadn't told him her arrival time. Part of her was too afraid of a grand reunion, didn't know if she was ready to fall into his arms. Or if she even deserved to. Not yet. Her apartment felt smaller than she remembered. Same bookshelf, same chipped mug on the counter, same familiar creak in the floorboard near the window. But she was different. And the walls, once her fortress, now felt like a cage. Emma dropped her bag by the door and collapsed on the couch, soaked and exhausted. She didn't cry. Just stared at the ceiling and let the silence settle, a heavy blanket of 4 years of separation. The truth was she didn't know where they stood anymore. Distance had frayed things. Not broken but blurred. The rhythm they'd found before she left had slipped into something tentative, like a song she once knew how to hum but couldn't quite remember the lyrics to. She hadn't told Lucian she was back. Not because she didn't want to see him, but because she was scared. It was 2 days later, on a clear, breezy Thursday, that she found the letter. It had been slipped under her door in a cream-colored envelope, her name printed in his familiar, beautiful handwriting. Emma. She opened it carefully, her heart a quiet drumbeat. Come to the old library. 8 p.m. Elle. That was all. No plea. No pressure. Just a place. A time. A door left open. The library hadn't changed much. Still dimly lit. Still echoing with the quiet hum of fluorescent bulbs and distant HVAC rumbles. The same uneven tiles in the entryway, the same musty, comforting scent of old paper and wood polish. Emma stepped through the doors with slow, cautious steps. He was there. Of course he was. Lucian stood in the back reading area, near the old oak table where they used to sort donation bins. He wore dark jeans and a gray sweater, his hair slightly tousled, his hands tucked into his pockets with a nervous familiarity. He turned when he heard her, and smiled. Not the playful smirk she remembered, but something softer, sadder, hopeful. Hi, he said, the word a soft, beautiful sound after so long. Emma swallowed, her throat tight with emotion. Hi. A beat passed. You're back, he added, a quiet observation that felt like a universe of meaning. I am. Why didn't you tell me? I needed to see how it felt. And? Emma exhaled, the sound a quiet, shuddering release. It feels like I left something behind. Lucian nodded, his eyes full of a deep, patient understanding. You didn't. I wasn't sure you'd still be here. I told you I would be, he said, even if it hurt. Her throat tightened and a single tear escaped, a silent betrayal of her composure. He stepped closer, his voice quieter now, a low, gentle murmur that was just for her. I kept writing you, even when you stopped answering every message. Emma looked up, her gaze raw with honesty. I didn't stop because I didn't care. I know. I stopped because I cared too much. Lucian took a slow breath, his eyes searching hers, a silent question in the air between them. Then tell me right now, do you still care? Emma's voice wavered, a fragile, beautiful thing. More than I know what to do with. He closed the final space between them, not touching her, just standing close enough that she could feel his warmth, the gentle rise and fall of his chest. I wanted you to see this place again, he said softly, his gaze sweeping over the familiar bookshelves. Where it all started. The first time I realized you weren't just a girl with her nose in a book. You were the story I hadn't read yet. Emma's eyes welled, the tears a hot, cleansing stream. Lucian. I thought I lost you after high school. And then again after Paris. But every time you came back. And I'm tired of loving you from a distance. She stared at him, at the profound sincerity in his eyes. And for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like a wall. It felt like air ready to be breathed. Lucian reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. Emma froze, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. He didn't open it right away. I'm not asking for promises you're not ready to make, he said, his voice steady, a gentle rock in her storm. But I am asking for this. He flipped the box open. Inside, not a diamond, but a ring of white gold, simple and unadorned, with a tiny, delicate sapphire star set in the center. Emma gasped softly, a silent, beautiful sound. Lucian's voice was filled with a quiet conviction. This isn't an engagement ring. Not yet. It's a beginning. A question, not an answer. He looked into her eyes, the love in his gaze a profound, unwavering thing. Emma Brooks, will you build something with me? Not perfect. Not easy. But real? She stared down at the ring, the tiny star shimmering with the light of 1,000 memories. Then at him. And suddenly, it all came rushing back. The notes in her locker, the dance in the gym, the way he'd waited when she ran, the journal he read with her, the letters, the rain, the space between who she'd been and who she was now. And she knew. There was only one answer. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, a beautiful, cleansing release. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. The ring didn't change everything. It didn't fix Emma's instinct to overthink. It didn't erase Lucian's complicated family legacy. It didn't dissolve the fears that lingered in the quiet corners of their minds. But it gave them something neither had dared ask for before. A beginning they chose, together. They didn't announce it to anyone. Not right away. Emma wore the ring on a chain beneath her blouse while she translated for a United Nations conference on renewable energy. Lucian kept the empty velvet box in his coat pocket like a charm. Like proof that something real, something earned, had finally begun. They talked more now. Not just the flirtatious banter they'd always shared, but the hard things, financial fears, family wounds, emotional habits that took years to form and would take years more to unlearn. But they listened. They stayed. They moved into a sunlit loft downtown. It wasn't fancy. Just 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, and a creaky fire escape with a view of the skyline. Emma claimed a corner for her books and translation materials. Lucian took over the kitchen and installed speakers he could connect to with a single button. There were lazy mornings where they read side by side and never spoke. Late nights when they argued, then apologized through forehead touches and half-laughs. Emma still flinched when she thought she was failing. Lucian still forgot to slow down when stress piled high. But little by little they built something steady. Not flawless, but whole. The wedding was small. Just 30 people, a garden, strings of paper lanterns, and music that made Emma's mother's scarf flutter in the breeze where it hung from her bouquet. Lucian wore a gray suit. No tie. Emma wore a satin gown with pockets and stars embroidered on the sleeves. They wrote their vows the night before, in bed, trading sentences between sips of tea and laughter. Lucian's last line, "You are not my better half. You are my beginning." Emma's, "I was always afraid of being seen. But you looked and I stayed." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. They traveled. Lisbon, Kyoto, Edinburgh. A rented cottage near the cliffs of Moher where the wind tangled Emma's hair and Lucian fell in love with Irish coffee. They came back sunburned and tired and full of inside jokes that made no sense to anyone but them. Back home, Lucian expanded his firm, quietly, carefully, only taking clients that aligned with his values. Emma freelanced selectively, choosing projects that gave her joy. She started writing again. Just for herself. Pages filled with diary-style stories, half-finished poems, and the occasional memory of a boy who once wrote her notes in the margins of her life. One fall afternoon, Emma found a letter in her inbox. It was from a former professor. A publisher had read one of her conference speeches, something she'd translated on the fly, and wanted to know if she'd consider submitting a collection. Lucian found her standing in the doorway, stunned. He took one look at her expression and smiled. "You're going to say yes." She laughed, overwhelmed. "Am I?" He walked over, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You said yes to harder things." Months passed. Seasons shifted. They bought a second-hand telescope, drank wine on the rooftop, talked about starting a family, not with deadlines or pressure but with quiet wonder. Once, on a rainy afternoon, Emma opened her old journal, the one from high school. She found the entry from years ago. "He said he loved me. I didn't believe him. I do now." Lucian found her reading and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking?" he murmured, his breath a warm whisper against her hair. Emma smiled. "I'm thinking the stars didn't bind us," she said. "But they pointed the way." Epilogue. 2 years later. A small child toddled across their living room floor, clutching a well-loved plush lion. Lucian, barefoot and bleary-eyed, followed behind with a half-empty sippy cup and a grin that reached all the way to his eyes. Emma watched from the doorway, her hair pinned up, manuscript pages in one hand, a baby monitor in the other. Lucian looked up and mouthed, "Help?" Emma laughed, a beautiful, genuine sound. The child shrieked joyfully and tackled Lucian at the knees. They both went down in a heap of giggles. Emma set the pages aside and joined them, pressing a kiss to Lucian's cheek, then to the child's forehead. And for one quiet moment, the house held nothing but warmth. Love. Not as a grand gesture, not as a fragile hope, but as a daily choice. A life they built from the rubble of longing, brick by imperfect brick. Thank you for listening to Silent Heart Story, where every love that couldn't be said is finally heard. If today's story touched something quiet in you, a memory, a secret wish, or simply the feeling of being seen, then stay with us. Subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a heartbeat. Every day, a new whisper awaits.